Out of the clouds, Huns, bullets, wings, all around me. And I looked up at the heavens and I said, oh God, help me. I felt the machine lurch.
I turned my head over my shoulder and I saw that my pilot was slumped on the controls. There was a gasping sound. There I was, suspended in the air with a dead pilot.
The First World War, one of the most brutal conflicts in human history. A time when old tactics clash with new technology. Men entrenched in fortified lines that stretch across Europe are helpless as artillery shells rain down, high explosives shredding anything within range. The soldiers will come to regard the murderous struggle as a meat grinder. But above the savagery of the trenches, another battle is underway. 12 years after the Wright brothers' first flight, the aeroplane has become a killing machine in ways difficult to imagine. Using reconstruction and archive and motion picture footage, we will see how the rudimentary air machines helped win the war. The Royal Flying Corps and France's Service Aéronautique had entered the war untried and lacking experience. In the fury of war, their initial minor role has rapidly developed in an age of increasingly industrialized warfare. What had been regarded as an impractical curiosity has become an essential instrument of war. Their vulnerable observation aircraft range over enemy lines, seeking targets for the big guns and information for the commanders. They are the eyes of the army, but now they enter a phase of war that will be more challenging. This is not a story about the aces in glamorous fighting machines, but rather about the unsung heroes of the World War I air campaign.
With no parachute, you could either stay in the machine or jump. But either way, death is coming to you.
For these men, the joy of flight has become the cold certainty of sudden, violent death. These are the words, the experiences of the men who fought in the war above the trenches. Along the Western Front, a thin strip of scorched and cratered earth is all that separates the enemy trenches. It's a deadly stalemate. With millions of soldiers facing each other across no man's land. The shocking battles at Verdun and the Somme of the previous year, with their massive casualties, have failed to end or even shorten the war. And the casualty figures continue to rise dramatically.
Stretch your barrels! Stretch your barrels! Incoming! Incoming!
Nobody is seriously hurt. They cry joyously when we drag them covered in scratches and bruises. We do not always fare so well as this. Sometimes we drag them fearfully mutilated, or just in time to draw their last breath.
Our dead lie about in hundreds in no man's land. A truly horrible sight. I wonder what the mothers of these poor chaps would feel like if they could see their own sons thrown about in heaps like so much garden rubbish.
The scale of this killing is a direct result of the frightful nature of mechanized, industrialized warfare. heavy artillery, rapid-firing machine guns, poison gas, flamethrowers, and barbed wire entanglements all play their part in halting any attack made across the narrow belt of misery separating the front lines.
We caught our first whiff of it. We choked, spit and coughed. My lungs felt like they were being burnt out and going to burst. Red-hot needles were being thrust into my eyes. We did not quite realize the horror of this new form of cowardly and inhuman warfare. But we should have known that the Germans consider war a game without an umpire or a referee. When you had to grovel on the ground and do nothing, that's when it hit you. Being shelled and being able to do nothing about it was terrifying.
Crouched in the trenches, they can see nothing but the desolation of no man's land and the solid defences of the enemy's unbroken front line.
What can you see, Sergeant?
I can't see a plastic thing.
By 1916, the air war is absolutely crucial to war on the ground, because the air provided the means of seeing what goes on beyond the hill. It provided the means of recording the exact location of targets like German batteries, and it provided, with the clock code, the means of destroying those targets. So you could find your target and you could destroy it, and that is the purpose of the aircraft of the Royal Flying Corps.
Their vulnerable observation aircraft range over enemy lines, seeking targets for the big guns and information for the commanders. They are the eyes of the army. Along the British section of the Western Front, in the skies over the Somme, the Royal Flying Corps maintains its command of the air, the aerial observers grimly carrying out their missions.
I was doing end-on photography with Brushington. Rather a sticky job. The Hun threw everything at you at that height. Rifles, machine guns, field gun, the lot. My petrol tank was plugged. I was lucky not to damage the camera. The photographs proved quite useful.
On the Western Front, the situation was constantly changing. You were having to react to events as they happened, and these events were taking place all the time. So the pilots who were going up and the observers and taking these photographs had to get down very, very quickly. And the photographs had to be developed very, very quickly because there was absolutely no time to waste.
In the skies above Verdun, over the frightful continuing battle of attrition, French airmen confront the German air service in the world's first large-scale air battles. Without control of the air, the French observation machines are unable to perform the task of detecting targets for their artillery. The French air commanders are given orders to adopt a more aggressive policy, to attack rather than to defend. It is this policy adopted by French squadrons at Verdun that encourages Trenchard, the commander of the Royal Flying Corps, to adopt the same confrontational course of action over his sector of the battlefield.
Ein Meer aus Eisen krachte auf alle Front- und Stützlinien der Gegend. Der Lärm war schrecklich. Aufprall nach Aufprall. Das ganze Niemandsland war ein brodelnder Kessel. Das Werk der Zerstörung wuchs und wuchs. Es war unmöglich, sich vorzustellen, dass irgendjemand das überleben könnte.
Von unseren heroischen deutschen Fliegern ist nichts zu sehen. Die Engländer fliegen immer über unsere Linien, richten ihre Artillerieschüsse aus und bekommen alle ihre Granaten an unsere Schützengräben. Diese moralische Niederlage wirkt sich auf uns alle negativ aus.
The The actively aggressive policy of the British and French air services is one of forward control, to confront the enemy air force beyond its own front line and restrict its ability to observe the Allied lines. It's a state of affairs that will not last. The Allied airmen are encountering an enemy air force of renewed strength and capability. Reorganized German squadrons, led by pilots singled out for their ability and experience, and flying a powerful new fighting machine without equal, the Albatros.
Now, the Albatros is the first second-generation fighter. It is a whole new ballgame. It is faster, it's more powerful, and it is armed with 2 forward-firing machine guns. This is a game changer. This is something that has to be seen on. So the Royal Flying Corps has to just carry on. It has to suffer the losses in the air to attain what the generals on the ground want. And it's not just the generals, remember. If we don't carry out those missions, then men will die in their hundreds, possibly thousands. So it is the duty of the Royal Flying Corps.
The Allies prepare for a new offensive, one expected to break through the German lines within 48 hours. But they're about to receive a rude awakening.
Allied command of the skies is overshadowed by the power and capability of the deadly Albatros. Air casualties are expected to rise sharply.
At all levels, there is deep unease, as commanders in the field warn of the consequences.
The fighting will increase, I regret to say, but it is only a question of us keeping up longer than the Hun. If we cannot do that, we are beaten. I must warn you now, I anticipate a very heavy casualty list.
The Allied airmen are about to face a year that will threaten to break an army and shatter the Air Corps.
A sharp winter heralds 1917. Along the lines of the Western Front, the soldiers of the warring nations face each other across a battle-scarred landscape. Crouched in their entrenchments, they endure the torments of the elements, as well as those of war.
Occupying these trenches beforehand, they were absolutely filthy, and we spent most of our time cleaning them out. It was then that really made me think that trench warfare was not for me. I used to look up with great envy at the aircraft flying around.
For airmen engaged in surveillance, conditions are just as raw.
My feet and hands were frozen. Despite my face being well smeared with Vaseline, my nose was frozen. If a German machine gun had attacked me, I could not have fired my guns. All feeling had left my feet and hands.
Our engines were water-cooled. In the very cold weather, engines were difficult to start. At times, the only way to get the engines to start was to fill the radiators with water, near boiling point. The unfortunate mechanics had a very rough time climbing up to fill radiators with scalding water.
The German squadrons, led by hand-picked officers, take to the air in the latest fighting machine, the Albatros.
With its powerful 170 horsepower Mercedes engine and 2 synchronized machine guns, it's taking a savage toll of British and French airmen.
They move their operations back and forth along the front, determined to overpower the local opposition. This practice of rapidly de-rigging and redeploying to where they're needed most, plus the vibrant colors of their aircraft, gives rise to their nickname, the Flying Circus.
Spearheading the new Albatros aircraft that was Manfred von Richthofen. He was an accurate pilot and a deadly shot. In combat, single man-to-man combat, he would kill you. Secondly, he was a brilliant formation leader, so he magnified his own impact by leading his men to maximum effect into action. But thirdly, on the ground, he was a great teacher, so his principles of warfare were spread out throughout a large portion of the German Air Force.
Suddenly found a Hun diving on my tail. He was very fast and practically had me on toast as I had only a forward mounting. He held his fire until about 20 yards away and then circled about, firing from all directions. I got into a spinning nosedive and temporarily lost control. I'd given up all hope of living through it.
Trenchard has been repeatedly expressing his anxieties to senior officials and ministers back in Britain. The Allied air services are in desperate need of better machines. An engineering race is underway to design and supply new fighter planes to counter the German Hunters.
The men of the Royal Flying Corps knew what the men on the ground were suffering. They could see the trenches, they knew what was happening, and they felt they owed a duty to their comrades on the ground. That's why they were willing to take their own chances in the sky.
Taking photographs is a poor game. It is highly dangerous and doesn't give one a chance of telling tales. The people of this squadron have fairly got the wind up about crossing the lines, not without reason. A great number of machines have been shot down.
The Royal Flying Corps has no choice. It must maintain the pressure, carrying on with its missions, not giving up its foothold in the air.
If a British reconnaissance machine was shot down, they simply sent over another one because the job still had to be done. And if that one was shot down, they sent over yet another because the job still had to be done. This is why you got so many young, barely trained pilots sent over from Britain who ended up doing jobs that they really weren't up to. But they had to do them. Some of them learnt on the job and became very adept. Others just, were shot down and then either ended up in captivity or were killed at the age of 19.
The airmen who fly the vulnerable two-seat reconnaissance craft are left in no doubt of their primary duty.
Your first and chief duty is the destruction of the enemy guns by ranging our own artillery. You are an artillery machine until attacked. Then, by your own and your observers' efforts, you will change into a most effective fighting force. It is never sufficient to look around the sky in a casual manner. Never forget, look into the sun for the Hun. Always reserve your main burst of fire for when you are close. At the first sound of a shot from behind, look right, then left, before turning around. Make your attack vigorous. Never, never let a machine swoop down on you unawares. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Good.
At this time, the French army has fought the enemy to an iron-willed standstill at Verdun, stubbornly holding ground in the face of bitter fighting and over 500,000 casualties. But in the air, the French air service also faces a reinvigorated opponent.
Il y a un avantage tactique et technique allemand, en particulier avec les Albatros qui succèdent aux Fokker. On l'a vu avec les mitrailleuses qui se tirent synchronisées à travers l'hélice. Ça, c'est un avantage décisif, bien sûr. Et puis le fait que les Allemands procèdent de manière bien moins individualiste et organisent donc des escadrilles de chasse où ils peuvent rassembler plus d'une dizaine d'avions de chasse ensemble et qui donc attaquent de manière simultanée et ne cherche pas spécialement le combat héroïque, le combat chevaleresque. Les Français, au début, ne combattent pas en escadrille, mais vont réagir aux attaques allemandes en organisant eux aussi des escadrilles.
An enthralled public is becoming fascinated by the rising status and glamour of individual airmen. But it's the French who are the first to coin and use the term ace.
Les journaux de l'époque ont des tirages énormes. Et effectivement, ces journaux parlent des actes héroïques, et des actes héroïques qui n'engendrent pas beaucoup de morts. Donc pour l'opinion publique, pour le moral de l'arrière, le moral des civils, c'est une bonne chose. Et on insiste donc sur les pilotes de chasse, sur leurs exploits. Donc forcément, on imagine que pour le citoyen moyen, et même pour le soldat dans la tranchée, c'est la vie idéale. Mais un pilote de chasse a plus de chances de mourir qu'un soldat dans la tranchée, il ne faut pas l'oublier.
But Trenchard disapproves of the hero worship of fighter pilots. It detracts from the dangerous yet essential assignments being carried out by the less glamorous observation machines.
At the front, aircrew casualties are mounting and replacements are urgently needed.
Fortunately, publicity given to the celebrated aces has enticed a growing number of young volunteers eager to join the Corps. But back in Britain, the flying schools are failing to keep pace with the demand. Staffed by inexperienced instructors and out-of-date aircraft, they are producing pilots whose training is both brief and far from complete.
In no time at all, these rookie pilots are fighting for their lives.
People were being killed every day. This was going on all the time. People reacted to that. You couldn't live that sort of life and be entirely indifferent. You may have been cold-blooded in the air because you had to fight as if there was nothing but you and your guns. You had nobody at your side. You fought alone and died alone.
Please never worry on my behalf. Only live a day at a time. I have long given up worrying about what might happen to me. I have given myself up completely to my country. The war is the most terrible that ever raged. It will be fought to the bitter end until we secure that for which we stand. And I am proud to be able to do my share.
Others, too, are writing letters back home.
It is with the deepest regret that I have to inform you of your son's death. He died instantly, serving his country in the stoutest manner imaginable. I have lost, in your son, a gallant and loyal officer. You have my deepest sympathy. I'm writing to tell you some very sad news. Your son was killed yesterday in an aerial combat. His machine received a direct hit. His death was quite instantaneous. We buried him this afternoon, together with his brother officers.
With confidence and conviction, the generals have been planning their next offensive. Robert Nivelle, the French commander-in-chief, promises a breakthrough in 48 hours, and then the pursuit, driving the Germans from France. Prior to this great assault, the British commanders are committed to launching a major diversionary attack in their sector, at Aras. It is imperative that the outdated reconnaissance machines continue to fly behind enemy lines, gathering information and identifying targets, while the fighting machines must prevent the enemy from seeing the preparations for the impending attack. Now, along the Western Front, a fearsome artillery barrage is the prelude to the battles to drive the German armies from France. The heavy guns of the artillery begin their opening barrage. For the next 5 days, they will saturate the German lines and beyond. The airmen and the vulnerable observation machines are unwavering in seeking out targets and information for those on the ground, despite making themselves sitting ducks in the process.
The problem for the Royal Flying Corps is the time of the war. The French planned a huge offensive in the Champagne area, the Nivelle offensive. That was going to happen on the 16th of April, 1917. Now, we, the British, had to attack a week earlier on the 9th of April. That was at Aras. Now, that was a diversionary attack, a pinning attack to sort of pin the Germans in place. We have a major offensive, we've got outdated aircraft, and we've got a necessity to provide the services that the Royal Flying Corps provided. They have to be done come what may.
Ready! There was no rash charge. We climbed out of the trench, aligned ourselves with each other, and with a steady stride, started towards our objectives.
The troops advance across no man's land and draw nearer to the German front line, the expected response by the enemy and artillery fails to materialize. German gun positions, carefully plotted and targeted using intelligence gained from the air, have been obliterated with high explosives. Even as the troops are moving forward, the eyes of their artillery are above them, identifying threats and directing fire down on any concealed enemy strongpoints.
The success of the Battle of Aras can be put down in great degree to the success of the artillery in the way that the artillery hadn't necessarily done its job at the Somme. It did at Aras. And, you know, when you're looking for reasons behind the success of the artillery, you will always find the Royal Flying Corps there. The Royal Flying Corps was guiding that artillery onto its targets, and it did its job exceptionally well.
Such was the success of the advance and the amount of ground taken in the first 48 hours of battle that the British cavalry is brought forward, ready to exploit the anticipated breakthrough.
The infantry had advanced 3.5 miles in a single day. It is the greatest gain made by an army since the start of trench warfare. But now, with a terrible inevitability, the German forces moved back to a defensive position stronger and deeper than before.
As the attack progressed, they start to move out of the range of the field artillery. The gunners have a lot of trouble moving their guns forward in time. The infantry start to lose the support of their gunners, and therefore the attack starts to stagnate. There always seems to be another German line in front of them. That without the artillery, then the infantry aren't going anywhere. The artillery are absolutely crucial to success.
The British offensive is stalling, but the Royal Flying Corps are urged on to even greater efforts by what one contemporary would describe as Trenchard's magnificent eagerness to maintain the air offensive, pushing on regardless of cost. Now, the French launch their own offensive.
Donc l'attaque, l'offensive nivelle ou l'offensive du chemin des dames, on l'appelle aussi, c'est une offensive massive, classique quelque part, mais l'une des grandes causes de l'échec, c'est le déficit d'information, le manque d'information, alors qui s'explique par beaucoup de choses, mais en particulier par le mauvais temps qui a empêché l'aviation d'observation de jouer son rôle. Et habilement avait abandonné certaines lignes de tranchées pour raccourcir le front et pour développer une défense en profondeur. Et donc ce qui devait être une percée du front ou au moins une formidable avancée s'est transformé en une toute petite avancée, très coûteuse en hommes et donc un échec terrible.
Bad weather hinders aerial observation. But soon it's obvious that the attack is failing, and failing badly. The infantry has gone forward to face certain massacre. By the end of the day, what had been forecast as a ground-gaining 6-mile push forward was nothing more than 600 yards of the most brutal, savage butchery at a cost of over 100,000 casualties, 25,000 of them killed. In the air, the French pilots can only peer through the bad weather that hinders their efforts to follow the battle, while German artillery shells rain down. The battle is both a deciding factor and a breaking point for the French infantry. After the unrelenting, constant grind of deadly combat, believing themselves to be ignored and expendable, disobedience and disorder spread through their ranks.
Now it is necessary to divert the enemy and take the pressure off an increasingly exhausted and disaffected French. The Royal Flying Corps is asked to provide maximum support for the army against an increasingly confrontational enemy.
Gentlemen, there is no doubt that the Germans have produced a considerable number of fast single-seater scouts, of which the best is the Albatros. The German aeroplanes are merely engaged in trying to bring down our aeroplanes, whereas ours are doing work mainly required by the army. Our superiority is sustained only by fighting beyond German lines. The Germans have given up reconnaissance entirely and have confined themselves to defensive fighting on their own territory. But if the tactics were to change, the army generally would be most seriously affected. The casualties must be faced.
Trenchard's aggressive attack policy is reaching its crisis.
For many of the pilots, the real horror was of burning to death in the sky. They were surrounded by petrol. Their aircraft was inflammable. It would catch fire at the drop of a hat. And there they were, at 10,000 feet, in a burning aircraft. You have a choice. You can burn to death or you can jump. I mean, it haunted many of them. It was something they all had to face. Every time they took off, they could be shot down in flames, and that awful choice would be before them.
From a reading of these letters, it's hard to imagine what these young men must have been feeling, because they know that every time they enter the skies, there's a danger they'll be picked off like fish in a barrel. Yet they carry on regardless, taking the fight to the enemy and, if need be, sacrificing their lives for the thousands of men below in the trenches.
The machine next to me went down in flames, and the observer jumped out at 15,000 feet up, sooner than he burnt alive. He disappeared, falling over and over.
At no other time during the conflict will the Royal Flying Corps suffer such devastating casualties.
The casualties that were suffered were severe. Everyone you knew, almost, if you're in a squadron mess and you're dead, you're a prisoner, you're wounded. People are dying all the time within your squadron. But you've got to look at the bigger picture. For those losses, relatively small, measured in tens, in hundreds at most. On the ground, men die in the thousands. 150,000 casualties in the Battle of Aras, of which 50,000 will be dead. That's the big picture. So the losses of the Royal Flying Corps have to be suffered so that more don't die on the ground. It's not optional. There is no choice.
To British airmen, both then and to this day, it will earn its notorious place in their remembrance as Bloody April. To the population back home, the war in the air is one of romance and excitement. Despite Trenchard's distaste of glamorizing the exploits of individual scout pilots, they are now seen as champions by a British public eager for heroes. But along with the airmen and their vulnerable observation machines, their heroes have paid an awful price. During the 30 days of April 1917, the Royal Flying Corps lost 275 machines, and over 400 of its airmen were killed or wounded.
Compared to the staggering number killed on the battlefield, this total seems tiny in significance. Yet it's almost half its total strength, a staggering percentage of losses that could have torn the heart out of the Corps.
Fortunately, and at long last, there are glimmers of hope on the horizon. Now, its pilots get their hands on the controls of the new machines finally being delivered. The Sopwith Camel, the SE-5A, and the Bristol Fighter.
I feel I can look after myself. I can handle a machine in any position, and I have made good marks in gunnery. I was up today. I rolled, looped, spun, and did 100 other stunts, which will be useful in fighting.
These planes are coming in, and they're going to make a huge difference. They're going to be able to do things the planes haven't been able to do up till then, and they're going to basically rejuvenate the Royal Flying Corps. There are a lot of empty chairs. We've lost a lot of good men. We've lost a lot of aircraft. But now, let's look forward to the next stage.
In addition, the methods for training pilots at the flying schools are completely restructured. New strategies and disciplines challenge the ever-larging formations of enemy aircraft. Aerial tactics are improved and refined.
Effectivement, on n'est plus dans la même guerre. En 1918, La guerre aérienne, c'est pas la guerre de 1914 ou de 1915. On concentre les avions, ils doivent agir ensemble, on apprend aux nouveaux pilotes à manœuvrer ensemble, et donc pour vraiment gagner la bataille aérienne, obtenir la supériorité aérienne et jouer un rôle décisif dans la victoire. Et donc cette nouvelle guerre, elle est assimilée par l'état-major, puisque l'état-major comprend que ce qu'ils vivent, c'est plus du tout ce qu'ils avaient imaginé en 1913 ou 1914. On est dans un monde nouveau, mais il y a une accélération pendant la guerre, mais c'est vérifié par la plupart des guerres, hein. Il y a un progrès technique considérable.
The fighting in the air enters a new chapter as better machines and pilots begin to arrive at the front in ever greater numbers.
New boy, come, sit down, join us. Come on, sit down.
Second Lieutenant Andrews.
Lieutenant Ewan Robergati.
Pleasure to meet you, sir. Nice to meet you.
Dudley
How are you?
McGregor. And every pilot in the squadron was right on their toes. Morale was very high indeed. You felt you had joined something worth joining.
The fighting on the ground continues its own brutal course, a pattern of costly attacks against strong defensive lines and ever-growing casualty lists. The British Army gathers its strength for a series of major attacks in Flanders. The pilots and observers are now well versed in the role they will play in this seemingly endless war. They know that unless they dominate in the air, suppressing the enemy's guns, the killing on the ground will be limitless.
Resolution in the face of likely death and a gritty determination to carry out their mission has enabled the British pilots to win back control of the air of the battlefield, driving back the now outnumbered German squadrons and forcing them firmly on the defensive. And this control of the air is vital as the British Army launches its Flanders offensive.
We got orders to take up a machine to try and find the 30th Division who had got lost. So off we went and tootled over our lines. The worst barrage that has ever been known, and I had to fly through it.
Our task was to fly into that tunnel below the flight of field gun Charles. Look for any target we could see. We flew like goldfish in a bowl, swimming around the sky in all directions.
I've seen as many as 50 or 60 aircraft, all spinning round each other, making a lot of noise. Tracer bullets flying all over the place.
The war has changed. During one of the major offensives, the aces, the scouts, their role suddenly stops being shooting down their opponents. It becomes diving down, actually attacking the troops on the ground. You know, using their machine guns and small bombs to try and disrupt enemy attacks. Because in the end, the war on the ground is paramount.
As the troops struggled in the mud of Passchendaele, so too did the hope of Germany's swift defeat.
With no decisive victory in sight, 1917 draws to a close, a year of fading hope. And yet, important lessons are being learned. And while not immediately apparent to the men in the trenches, 1918 will see the nature of war undergo a fundamental change.
A major German offensive is anticipated during 1918. The German army is hoping to achieve a conclusive victory before the arrival of men and material from the United States, which has now entered the war on the Allied side. French commander General Verdun has been harboring his resources, restoring morale, reinforcing the military, anticipating the vital role planes will play in the expected attack. Bombers have been striking at targets far from the war's front line. Civilians, once far removed from the fighting, have been drawn into the realities of this rapidly evolving warfare.
Amidst the turmoil of repelling the enemy, it's decided to combine the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service. The RAF is born. As it comes into being, its airmen are waging war with all the resourcefulness and experience gained from years of bloody aerial combat.
Pendant la grande offensive allemande de 1918, là, l'aviation joue un rôle essentiel avec un nombre considérable d'avions et à tous les niveaux. Il y a plusieurs rôles de l'aviation qui sont maintenant bien définis, bien séparés et de plus en plus efficaces. Donc l'observation de plus en plus précise, c'est quelque chose de décisif pour la tactique.
The German attempts to achieve a war-winning breakthrough are repulsed, exhausted by a lack of supplies and resources, faced with the rapidly growing strength of its adversaries, and manpower arriving from the United States. The German armies are forced to give ground, falling back before the now unstoppable advance of the Allies. The years of deadlock and trench warfare are at an end. There is movement on the Western Front as the Allies surge forward.
Keep moving!
With exhaustion and war weariness taking hold, the Imperial government requests an armistice. After 4 long and bloody years, the guns fall silent on the Western Front. Bloody April 1917 was the lowest point for the men of the Flying Corps. On the 1st of April 1918, 1 year after the slaughter of Bloody April, the Royal Air Force had come into being.
At the start of the war, the Royal Flying Corps didn't know what it was doing. Didn't really understand its role. The army didn't understand its role. But during the war, it found its role. It was the servant of the Royal Artillery. The Royal Artillery was the war-winning weapon. But it was so much more by the end of the war.
I think you can safely say that virtually everything that's been done in the air to the present day had been tried in those years of the war in some proto form, in some very basic, some elemental form. It had already been tried. Those things that working were persevered with, the things that didn't work, they simply discarded. And the fact that so much was achieved in such a short time is due to the fact that these people were working out what was possible, refining it, and doing it.
Without them, the war could have been even longer, even more murderous than it was. They did help shorten the war. They did help bring victory to the Allies. It was a crucial role, and the RAF set its place in the British Armed Forces that has never been questioned ever since.
The fledgling air divisions had come of age while fighting a savage war in the sky. From an amusing novelty to an indispensable independent force, standing in the line of battle alongside the Army and the Navy, its ability is acknowledged at the highest levels.
It was, and still is to this day, the daring exploits of the individual pilots known as aces that have captured the imagination. Their achievements, the outstanding memory of the air war.
But it was the uncelebrated airmen, flying wearisome and ponderous observation missions over enemy territory, who made the greatest contribution in the war above the trenches. In the remembrance of the First World War, the actions of this small force of pioneering warriors may pass unnoticed.
But their words still speak to us, allowing us to share their thoughts, to recognize their tenacity in the face of horrifying circumstances. Their modest words speak loudly of their resolve, a lasting legacy passed on to the newly formed Royal Air Force, with a spirit that continued on into the Second World War and is still present today.